By all accounts, the Sun Belt voted to add Louisiana Tech to its conference on Monday, and it'll be announced later in the week. And I think that's the right, natural, logical step for the Sun Belt to make, despite the past history, where even as recent as 5 years ago, the Louisiana Tech athletic director at the time, really easy to say, had talked about why nobody in Conference USA would even consider joining the Sun Belt because it was such an inferior conference. And now Louisiana Tech jumped at the chance to rejoin the Sun Belt where it once was more than 25 years ago. And while it is the logical, natural, 100% right choice for the Sun Belt, I think there are some people who are questioning whether or not that was the right choice. Because despite being on a somewhat downturn on the football field, where Sonny Cumbie has not been the world beater that I think many at La Tech thought he was going to be, it's still a pretty good football program. They have still guys in the NFL making an impact that went to Louisiana Tech. But it's deeper than that, because we now live in a college football stratosphere where everybody is focused on brand names, head coaches, as much attention, notoriety as you can get for yourself. And the Sun Belt's not going to be able to play in that sandbox. Like they're not ever going to be able to compete with anybody in the SEC, ACC, Big 10, Big 12. Pac-12 even. They just don't have that ability. They don't have the cachet. So when everybody's doing one thing, and this is no different than whether it be on the football field, right? Where like Army and Navy can't compete to recruit the best quarterbacks who are going to sling the football all around. They can't recruit 6'6", 330-pound linemen. So they're forced to do something different. And I think it's a somewhat similar situation that the Sun Belt is facing right now. You are forced to do something different because you're never going to beat the big dogs at their game. You're never going to beat the SEC, ACC, Big 12, and Big 10 at having eyeballs, at having big-time brand/name recognition. You're never going to win those battles. So what can you do to still be interesting, relevant? You lean all in on regionality, and regionality leads to rivalries. And if you can say, hey, we might not have the biggest stadiums, the highest paid coaches in the country, etc. You can go on down that list of things that you are going to get beaten at by the likes of the Power Four conferences. You know what they don't do as well as you do? Is hotly contested rivalries, is regionality. And I think that's okay. When everybody else is zigging, somebody has to zag, like by definition. Because if everybody's trying to play the same game, are the MAC and the Sun Belt, Conference USA, Mountain West, are you just going to get squashed by the 10,000-pound behemoth? Or are you going to do something different to differentiate yourself and make yourself interesting and important and relevant? And so I give the Sun Belt a bunch of credit because we have been so like laser focused now. Anytime conference realignment happens, it's, well, what kind of TV market do they bring? Which is a stupid ass argument outside of the Power Four, right? And even when the Big Ten added Maryland and Rutgers, it was, well, they're going to bring Washington, D.C. and New York. Well, kind of not really, because nobody in New York gives a damn about Rutgers athletics. They don't. But they brought cable subscriptions to the Big Ten network. Well, that shouldn't matter to the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt shouldn't give a damn about cable subscriptions because you know what? CBS Sports Network, ESPN, ESPN2, etc. You're not helping. Like nobody's gonna put on CBS Sports Network that wasn't already on. Like no cable carrier is gonna be like, oh well, now we're gonna have to put CBS Sports Network on in Shreveport because it doesn't work that way. And so while You can argue about markets, right? Like the Pac-12 can say, oh, when we added Texas State, we added this San Antonio and Austin markets. Well, not really, because you're not going to have a network. You can pretend and tell your TV executives that you're trying to pitch something to that, like, oh, well, we have the San Diego market and the San Antonio market and the Austin market. But if nobody in San Antonio or Austin gives a damn about the Texas State Bobcats, you don't have those markets. And so the Sun Belt could have prioritized, well, if we have Middle Tennessee State, we'll get the Nashville market. No, you won't, because you know who gives a shit about Middle Tennessee State and Nashville? Nobody. And that's okay. So the Sun Belt did what was best for the Sun Belt. They needed a school in the Western Division because they are the one conference that still has divisions. Again, when everybody zigs and says we're going to do away with divisions, we're going to put the two best teams in our conference in the conference championship, logically, it makes sense for somebody to zag. And the Sun Belt has zagged and said, we're going to keep divisions. This is important to us. Winning a Sun Belt East or Sun Belt West championship, competing against schools that are regional to us, that are closer to us, breeds contempt, breeds rivalries, which all it does down the line is help our conference grow because we watch what's familiar and interesting to us. And I've made this conversation before and we'll continue to have it again. Ohio State, Michigan, even when one or both of them are not two of the top 10 teams in the program or 10 teams in the country, is constantly the number one rated college football game of the season year after year after year. Why? Because people know those two brands, they know they don't like each other. And even if I don't know a whole lot about Ohio State, a whole lot about Michigan, I have to sit down and watch this. Because one, you're never 100% sure what you're going to see. But then two, there's that factor of these two don't like each other. And I want to watch that unfold. It is drama. It is theater happening on a football field. And the more you can create that inside your conference, Sun Belt, where you can pit Georgia Southern versus Georgia State, you can compete James Madison versus Old Dominion, and James Madison versus Marshall, and Old Dominion versus Coastal Carolina. And you go on and on and on and on and on down that line. The more that you can make those compelling, interesting regional rivalries where it's relatively easy for fans, not even relatively easy. It is easy as all get out for fans to get from Ruston to Monroe, Louisiana, for the Raging Cajuns to go to La Tech. The more that you can create those matchups, those atmospheres, those experiences, the better off your conference is. And so while the Sun Belt might have been better off courting Middle Tennessee State, Western Kentucky, Ohio, hoping and praying that East Carolina bolts from the American to go to the Sun Belt, the logical choice was Louisiana Tech, and they made that choice. Nobody, it doesn't sound as if, from the Sun Belt acted as if they were the smartest person in the room, and they had some revolutionary, fantastic idea. Just because it's conventional doesn't make it wrong. Just because it's boring doesn't make it wrong. Louisiana Tech and the Sun Belt, for lack of a better word, is a match made in heaven. It made all of the sense in the world, and rather than finding a reason for why it wouldn't work, it shouldn't work, and it didn't work, they just made it work. And that should give some hope that somewhere down the line, despite all of the ridiculousness that you've seen in college football over the course of the last even 15, 20 years, that there is still some hope and there is still a place in the game that being a somewhat regional conference that focuses on this is who we are and this is who we're going to be. This is what the conference is. And having everybody in pretty much lockstep in that regard is a good thing. And I think maybe even if we're rose-colored glasses, a wholly optimistic thing, but it does give me a little hope that maybe at some point there will be some regionality to this. Because if you look at every professional sport, despite there being nationwide sports, they're broken down by region. And outside of the Dallas Cowboys being in the NFC East, there aren't a lot of head scratchers there. The Golden State Warriors don't play in the Eastern Conference Atlantic Division for a reason. And when college football has somewhat lost its way to where Cal and Stanford are in the ACC and Oregon and Rutgers are in the same conference, it is somewhat refreshing to see a conference go, I don't care about markets. I don't care about which school supposedly enhances our next TV deal. This is about butts in the seats for everybody. It's about people paying attention and caring about what's going on in this conference. And I think there's still something to be said for that. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe we'll look back at this as a flashpoint of like, can you believe that the Sun Belt did this? No wonder things went south for them. I just don't think that's going to happen, because I think they logically zagged where everybody else zigged. Maybe that's just my own bias and my own hope that there's still room for schools, conferences that are like-minded and geographically located somewhat similar to each other. Your MACs, your Sun Belts, your Mountain Wests. I hope maybe someday we can get back to that, because I think that's probably, at some level, a good thing for the sport overall. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you're listening to the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.